If you're not in the presentation room, best you come in. If you aren't coming in, just stay quiet out there, please. Even if you are a little one who's all antsy. Thank you. Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Okay, how is everybody? Good? Things are good? Life's good? Okay, raise your hand if you're a parent. Raise your hand if you're a parent. Okay, Allahu Akbar. So I will be doing this like once a month, a session here for parents. Okay, you can bring the kids. You're more than happy to bring the kids. They do have to behave because I get bothered when the kids are scurrying about and stuff. So like I will stop and admonish them if they don't behave, which is fine, you know. And we'll talk about different issues and this type of thing. Today we're talking about public schools and stuff going on in the public schools, which everyone's very, very concerned about. You know, other times we'll talk about parenting skills, whatever issues really people want, okay? If you don't, anyone who doesn't know me, my name is Michael Abraham. You can just call me Michael, Brother Michael. Public school teacher for 15 years now. I also do training for teachers in public schools and actually in Islamic schools as well now, too. I train them on instruction, behavior management, and the public schools, I train them about Muslims and teach about Muslims, and I wrote this book, Engaging Muslim Students in Public Schools, okay? So if you have a question, you know, you'll get the chance to ask it. So get that in your mind because you'll have the chance to ask it. The crowd's big enough that I'm going to, you know, go through some presentation material to get it warmed up, but other times we'll have more of a discussion about different issues pertaining to the youth because there's many issues pertaining to the youth, okay, that people need assistance with. So first, okay, we're going to go over first advocacy opportunities in the public schools. Thing number one, the opportunities that exist to advocate and educate people. It's okay, go ahead, just make it quick and be as quiet as possible, please. Thank you. Then I'll talk about parents' rights, the rights that you have as a parent in this country and in this state, and the sensitive issues that everyone is concerned about, and where those things kind of are right now, both in the country and in our state, because it's like an ever-evolving situation, of which there's some good news and some bad news. And the Muslims' engagement in those things, overall, it's good, okay? We need to be more involved in the public schools. And whatever, you know, we're not used to doing, whatever fears we have about that type of thing, we have to get over it and, you know, find ways in whichever level you are comfortable being involved in the schools. We have to do that. That's like expected in American society for parents to participate in the public schools. And the public schools in general, they are a place of participation and a place of advocacy and a place where people compete over narratives, what gets taught about, what doesn't get taught about in the hearts and minds of people, okay? With parents' rights and sensitive issues, I'll go over curriculum review, which means getting to know ahead of time what the school is going to teach. So that way, if there's something they're going to teach that you don't want your kid to be a part of, you can take action to make that not happen. Second thing is having kids be absent from school for religious education, which is something you have a right to do in Minnesota to a certain degree if your kid goes to a public school, that not every parent knows about, that you should know about, that we really should take advantage of as a Muslim community especially, and that we should pressure the Masjid and Islamic institutions to offer programs for the kids during the school day, Monday through Friday, because we have a right to have the kids out of school in those programs during that time. Third thing is library books. There's some specific laws and policy pertaining to library books in these issues that people ought to understand. And the last thing with that is bathrooms. Bathrooms are a big issue in schools. And Title IX, okay, and I'll explain what Title IX is. And the last thing I'll go over is the implications for these things with politics and elections. Okay, I don't like politics very much. Politics is a big headache. But the reality is, what happens in the education system, Bismillah, what happens in the education system begins with, What happens in the education system begins with law. It begins with the laws that the state passes. And then it begins with the policies of the school boards. And then the policies of the departments within the school districts and the Department of Education. There's many, many different layers to laws in education. And there's federal law as well, which, in the United States, the federal government, the government in Washington, D.C., they cannot mandate schools to do anything according to the Constitution, actually, the 10th Amendment of the Constitution, unless the states choose to take money from the federal government for certain programs, which all of them do. So then through that way, there's federal policy as well. So there's all these different layers of law, and it also means there's different layers of influence, where different people and different interests can influence the public education system, and we ourselves can also influence the public education system. Okay, first thing, advocacy in school. If you're not aware, every teacher who is licensed to teach in the state of Minnesota, and any job opening that is open for a teacher, if there's a licensed qualified candidate for that job, the school or the school district has to hire someone who's licensed. If they don't have an applicant who's licensed, then they can hire someone who's not licensed through different systems. But for the most part, they have to hire someone who's licensed. When you have a teacher's license, you have to renew it every 5 years. To renew it, you have to do 150 hours of continuing education, as they call it, or professional development. So the teacher's own education is a big part of what goes on in education. By Minnesota law, those 150 hours of education that they have to do has to fall into certain categories. The first category that Minnesota state law and policy of the Department of Education lists for teachers to do continuing education in is cultural competency training. Cultural competency training, which means learning about different cultures and learning about the diversity of the different communities that are taught. A teacher, in order to get relicensed, they have to do a minimum of 8 hours of continuing education or professional development about different cultures. So it is an enormous opportunity to teach public school teachers and everyone in the education system about what it means to be Muslim, about Islam, about how Islam affects someone's everyday life, about how it creates certain wants and desires for our children, about the way it affects our psychology, about the different histories of Muslim peoples as a people. It's a tremendous opportunity to do it. And it's actually disappointing that the Muslim community more broadly has not taken more advantage of it. There's over 3 million licensed teachers in the United States of America. It is the most licensed profession in the United States of America. This is not something particular to Minnesota. Pretty much every state has the same type of requirement. If we could get 3 million teachers across the country to, the nice thing about it is they have a professional incentive to learn about Muslims, to learn about Islam. How do we advance the general education of Muslims in American society? How do we do it? The people who learn about Islam, they have some sort of self-interest in doing it. Either they're curious about religion or they hate Islam for some reason, so they go seek out knowledge about it. That is not most people. Most people in the society do not have that personal interest to go seek it out. So who has a professional interest to learn about Islam and to learn about who Muslims really are and all that type of thing? People in the public education system. Not just them, but certainly people in the public education system have the most interest in it. And they have a really large interest in it too because we have so many kids. Muslims are a very young population of people in general. The average age of an American is 39. Average age of a Muslim is 23. That's because of all the young kids that we have. So the people in Maplewood or St. Paul or wherever, they experience Muslims being around them in a certain way and to a certain extent. The teachers in the schools experience that even more. Because for every adult that's out in the community, there's 3, 4, 5 kids that are in the school. And there's some schools where there's a high percentage, 25, 50% of the kids sometimes. In the district schools, I'm not talking about the charter schools that are like all Muslim kids. In the district schools where they are mostly Muslim kids. So they know that, and they know that there's cultural differences and all this type of stuff, and teachers are generally open-minded people. So they're willing to learn, okay? Recommend my book, to your kid's school, recommend to them to go to abrahameducation.com. Email me at info@abrahameducation.com. I will help you talk to the school to get them to do this type of training. It's really a proactive thing that we have to do to advocate for ourselves, and I've made it already, okay? I've made the whole thing, not everything they got to learn, but most everything. And every other group of people in the society has done this, okay? If you look at a K through 12 learning education, you will have so much reading about World War II and the Holocaust and the experience of Jewish people and the concentration camps and being persecuted by the Nazis and then coming to America. There are so many basic books throughout late elementary school, middle school, and high school that are themed about the experience of Jewish people in World War II. How did that happen? That happened because when Jewish people came to this country, early 20th century and after World War II and such, they did this type of advocacy. They went to the schools and said, here, you should use this book. Here, you need to know about this. You should teach about this. A couple years ago, I was in talks with Fairfax County Public Schools in Virginia with the head of their language arts department. Fairfax County Public Schools has 180,000 students, one of the largest public school districts in the country. They told me that their language arts teachers and like the lead language arts teachers at their schools, they go to synagogues every year not to learn about like the Jewish religion or this type of thing, but people in the synagogues teach the language arts teachers how to teach these books and how to teach the curriculum, all that type of stuff. They're going to synagogues to do that. And that's something that they've had for generations, going back to this. So it is not something abnormal for like a religious community to do that or an ethnic community or anything like that. And there's loads of books written about teaching African American kids, teaching Latino kids, teaching Native American kids, all that type of stuff. Usually when I present this to teachers, they say this is something that they've been waiting for. They've been teaching Muslim kids for 20 years and no one brought a program like this to them. So it's something beneficial, and you know, like when we're more proactive like that, it's better because you can educate people in like a comprehensive way, in a controlled way, which is easier and better than doing it in something that's reactionary. And when that's not going on and we end up just having to be reactionary, it's more difficult for people and they experience it as something more difficult. Okay, other things just in general. Okay, I mentioned the thing about continuing education. Throughout, under Tim Walz and with the Democratic Party taking over all the branches of the Minnesota government now, there's some good and bad in that. Now, in their reform of Minnesota's omnibus education law, like the basic law of Minnesota that funds education, they have put throughout it that curriculum and teaching practices in schools need to be what they call culturally sustaining, meaning it has to help families sustain and maintain their kids' culture. That is literally written into the law of Minnesota's education law. Why? Because there's actually a ton of research that shows that when the children of immigrants especially stay closer to their home culture, they actually do better in school and their life outcomes are better. There is a book written by the American Psychological Association that's a collection of research that took place through the 1990s and the early 2000s called The Immigrant Paradox in Youth and in Immigrants. It's called The Immigrant Paradox in Youth and Adolescence, And the subtitle is Becoming American a Developmental Risk? Because long-range studying of the children of immigrants across many different studies, across many different demographics of people, have found that the children of immigrants who assimilate more into American society, they do worse in school and in career outcomes, and they're more likely to make poor choices for their mental health and their physical health. And for the kids who stay closer to their home culture of their parents, the opposite is true. They stay more self-disciplined, they have better health outcomes, they have better academic and career outcomes, and all that type of stuff. So the justification for the public school system and teachers in the public school system to partner with us in maintaining our kids' cultural identity is completely there. I have it all written out in here, and many of them know it as well, and they're looking for help as well. And of course, if you're from a Muslim culture, religion is intertwined with that. And any sociologist, any anthropologist, in Western academia who studies Muslims will tell you that, okay? Just the other thing, too, throughout Minnesota education law, things are regularly called for to be age appropriate for children, and no matter what the thing they're talking about is, whether it's what's being taught, whether it's the type of counseling that they receive, whatever, the term age appropriate is to be taught. Now, what's age appropriate and what is not age appropriate is different from one person to another, maybe, but it is important for us to give our input to schools on what we deem to be age appropriate. And with certain areas, the law pretty much always tells school districts that they have to be surveying parents, and they have to be taking input from parents, and they have to use the input from parents for what they decide to do. So when it comes to what is age appropriate and with the curriculum, we can influence like that with that. Also, too, for the teaching force and the curriculum and committees, what I'll get to in a second, those are all called to reflect the diversity of the community. Okay, reflect the diversity of the community. And, the student bodies in Minnesota, across America now, they're very, very diverse. But again, like we have a huge, like the amount of kids that Muslims have in schools, it is like social power that we have that we ought to utilize, especially in this state, because in this state, it's not hard to take your kid out of a school and send them to another school. We have open enrollment in this state. So if you're not happy with the school in your district, your neighborhood school, if you're willing to provide the transportation, you can send them to a school in another district. And we have the longest standing charter school law. Charter schools actually began in the state of Minnesota, so we have a lot of charter schools. So even if you cannot afford a private school, there is school choice in Minnesota. What that means is schools know that they are in competition to have kids in the class and to have kids attend the school. And how much money a school gets every year is directly tied to how many students are enrolled in the school. March generally, February and March, April, but especially March, is generally what they call budget season in schools. That is when the school districts are all doing their different projections and guessing of how many students each school is going to have next year. And if they project that a school is going to have less kids the next year than they had this year, they will cut funds from that school. No principal anywhere wants to have the conversation with his or her staff that we got to cut some positions because we're losing money because the district is projecting that we're going to have less kids next year. So especially in that springtime, you start telling the school, you start telling people at the district that you're thinking about going somewhere else. I'm not saying you should be like threatening, you should be good with how you approach people, but I'm just saying these implications exist beneath the surface with the way we interact with the schools. And it is power that we have. So you shouldn't think that people aren't going to listen to you or that they don't care about us. They have every professional incentive that exists to listen to us. Okay? Okay, two entities. I got asked about forming a parent-teacher association, or how do you get involved with a parent-teacher association? Okay, the PTAs, parent-teacher associations, are not like official parts of the district. They are not bodies of the district. They are formed by parents. In the late 19th century, actually, I think it was 1897, the first PTA was formed as a national organization, and a lot of them are formed locally. Some of them are connected to the national one, some aren't. But it's not like a part of the school. It's like a grassroots organization that parents formed. And in most of these districts, they've been around for generations. Okay, going back to, over 100 years in some of them. So then it gets passed down from one generation to the next and all that type of thing. You don't have to be part of the PTA to advocate with teachers. And the PTA is not an official body of the school district. It's a separate organization that parents just form. We could form a Muslim PTA. I think we should. I think we should form a state one first and then from there help people locally. Now, usually the culture of PTAs is they form really good relationships with the teachers. So like the first week or the second week of May, which is Teacher Appreciation Week, the local PTA, they're going to arrange and organize for everyone to get nice gifts for the teachers and all that type of stuff, to get them gift cards to Target and Starbucks and Chipotle and all that type of thing, so that they start forming good relationships with teachers. Some of the PTAs, they raise funds, they pay for some field trips, or they pay for guests to come in, or they will buy like a whole like electronics, different programs. Like a lot of the cultures of the PTAs, it's that they focus first on doing like really good things for the school district to build good relationships like that. But they're not like an official part of the school district or anything like that. Okay, it's just an organization of parents. That's all it is. Two entities that school districts do have to have by state law. Number one, every district has to have a school board advisory committee. And at least one person on that committee has to be a parent, but it can be more. And that committee also is supposed to reflect the diversity of the community. How do you become a member of the school board advisory committee? I don't really know, and it changes from district to district. You have to ask the school board. If you want help doing that, you're interested in that type of thing, email info@abrahamaeducation.com. We'll reach out to the district together. Unfortunately, you can't look on the website of these districts, I find, and they're not going to tell you exactly how you become part of that committee. So it's probably the case that sometimes it's connected to people who are really involved in the district, or they're maybe involved with the school board members, because those are the people who ultimately pick it. But the school board committee is supposed, or every school board by state law has to have an advisory committee that has to have parents on it, and they're supposed to ask for that committee's input on basically every single thing that they do. Okay? That's one thing. Every school has to have a site council. Some of you might be familiar with this with your kid's school. But every school has to have a site council that usually is primarily made of parents, but it has to have at least one parent on it. And again, it is supposed to reflect the diversity of the student body. So that is something you can ask the principal at your school, your kid's school, about. How you get on their site council. Every school has to have a site council. Okay, advisory committee for the school board, site council for the schools themselves. Okay, so those are ways we can advocate. Educating the teachers through professional development. Being on committees, the school board advisory committee or the school site council committee. Forming, a parent group, it can be an informal thing, okay? The PTO, parent-teacher organizations, they are like a non-profit, But, you can just form a group and advocate, and you should trust that at every single level of state law and education, there is justification for schools to listen to you and to listen to parents, okay? If you've had an experience counter to that, that is a problem with the professionals who gave you that experience. Okay, people in education do get very, very defensive, but they're not supposed to be that way. Okay. Any questions before we move on to parents' rights? Any questions? Sorry, I know I'm going kind of fast. It's a little late. Don't want to waste anyone's time, Okay. And do feel free to raise your hand at any time. I will stop and ask you if you have a question. Okay, parents' rights. Okay, the first thing, now first of all, in general, in the United States of America, there is a general right that is considered a constitutional right for a parent to direct the upbringing and education of their child. This was established by the Supreme Court in United States case law in the year 1925. In a Supreme Court case, which was actually in 1925, the state of Oregon tried to ban homeschooling, basically. They passed a law saying every single kid has to attend the public schools. And the United States, and that was challenged by a Catholic school, who obviously didn't want kids to go there. And the Supreme Court struck that law from Oregon down, and they said, you cannot be forced to send your kid to public school. You can send them to private school, you can homeschool them. You'll always have that right in the United States. And the Supreme Court said in that case that in general, it's embedded in the Constitution that a parent has the general right to direct the upbringing and education of their child, okay? Now, this is the thing, when you understand that there's different levels of law, okay? There's federal policy, there's state law, there's the Department of Education policy, there's the school board policy, all that type of stuff. There's all these different levels. All of it has to be constitutional. There's not anything, any policy, anything they try to do to parents or kids, it all has to accord with the Constitution. If it doesn't accord with the Constitution, it's illegal. Now, do places try to do that? Yes, they do. Usually out of ignorance that people in the institution themselves have about law. Can it take time to get constitutional rights if they're violated? Yes, it can. Okay, because if you have to file like a court case, it takes a long time to play out. And you know exactly what it means for a parent to have the right to direct the upbringing and education of their child. Every single piece of that is not played out yet in United States case law. So things can come up and are coming up actively where there hasn't necessarily been a ruling on this or that issue. So it's actually time, it's a good time right now to press some of these issues and find out where those laws lie if need be. I'm not saying to like be active looking to try to sue your kid's school or anything like that. But if it comes to that, ultimately the Constitution is on our side, and the Supreme Court, as it is made up of right now, they in general are very much in favor of parents' rights, family rights, and religious rights as well. Okay? And we've had some cases, we've had a couple cases here in Minnesota where we've been able to connect families with legal help when they've needed it to get their rights. And there are law firms out there that we can connect you with, I can connect you with, that will, they will write up a letter with their law firm's letterhead to the school district if they deem that they're violating your rights, and they will use that kind of legal weight to help, okay? Parents in St. Louis Park, they had help with this. Some other places as well, okay? Now, in Minnesota, Minnesota is one of, this is very, very important to understand, okay? Minnesota is one of 9 states in the country that has it written explicitly in their state law that parents have a right to review their kids' learning curriculum before they learn it. So anything that your kid is going to learn, or any book they're going to study, the outline of units that they're going to do, all that type of stuff, you have a right to see that ahead of time. And actually, the school district is mandated by law, or the charter school, if it's a charter school, they have to have a process already in place whereby if you make that request to learn about what your kid's going to learn, they have to have a process in place for you to be able to do that. And, you know, this isn't written explicitly in the law, but in general, anything that is a part of education law that obliges where the school is forced to do something, they have to do it in a way where it is accessible to the parents. So like, for example, if a kid's in special education, there's laws about a certain amount of meetings that they have to have with the parent. If the parent does not speak English, they have to have a translator in those meetings. So if a parent wants to review the curriculum, but they're nervous because maybe they don't speak English that well, or they don't read English that well, or whatever, the school district essentially has to make accommodations for you to be able to access it. Now, sometimes it's the case, and I will tell you, because parents have been exercising this right over the past year or so in this state, which is a good thing. Not every school is aware that parents have this right. And having gone through teacher training here in Minnesota and gotten my license and getting a master's degree in education, we were never taught that. Having done years and years and years of professional development within a school district, I never had that taught to me that parents had this right. So the educators themselves are not always educated about this, but the right does exist. And this is what happened in St. Louis Park in the fall. The elementary schools are going to be teaching about something the parents didn't want. They told the school about it, and the elementary school principal didn't know that the parents had this right and, reacted telling them, well, you can't have that. And then the district, and that's where we got a lawyer involved, and then they knew it was serious. So, understand that. Okay, the schools do not always know that. Inshallah, it's increasing, but they do not always know that you have that. Now understand, too, a few things about this. First of all, the school districts also have to have a different curriculum review process in place where they are constantly internally reviewing their own curriculum to make sure it's still good and then considering changes going forth and that type of thing. Okay, like an internal quality improvement, quality control process. So sometimes districts, they hear that term curriculum review and they're thinking about that. But that is a separate law that says they have to have that in place. The parent curriculum review is a different law that you do have. Now, what it says is if there is something in the curriculum review, if the parent sees something in the learning curriculum of their child that they object to, meaning they don't like it, they have a right for their kid to receive alternative instruction. And then if the school offers something alternative to what the parent objected to, and the parent still objects to it, then the parent is able to find their own source to do that part of the curriculum instead. Now, especially in grades younger than high school, pretty much every school will let you just opt the kid out of whatever you're objecting to as opposed to giving them alternative instruction. Okay? In high school, there's laws about credits that the kids need. So in high school, if you object to something, you say, I don't want my kid studying that unit, there could be a concern, well, if your kid's going to miss that unit, they're going to miss a month out of the quarter of that class, so then we can't give them the full credit for that quarter. We can only give them a half credit, and they need the full credit at the end of the day to graduate. That concern can come up in high school, but that concern does not exist prior to high school because there's no credit laws about middle and elementary school. So pretty much before high school, when you have this objection, the thing that works simplest for the schools is to just let you opt out, and they'll normally do that. Yes, Osman?
So if I understand what you're saying,
Yes.
in the high school,
Yes.
the school they have a right, the curriculum they want to. But the middle school and elementary school, and you can say, you can objection, but high school you cannot object.
No.
They say the critic
Listen. In high school, if there's something you object to, you can say, I don't want my kid learning that. I don't want my kid doing that unit. Then they have to provide an alternative, okay? So the curriculum in the state of Minnesota, it's not based on actual content. It's what you call a skills-based curriculum, okay? It's based on like your ability to, analyze texts or your ability to write a compare and contrast essay, okay? It's not based on specific content for the most part. There's some exception to that. So when you say, I object to them learning this, what they're supposed to do is say, okay, here's a way that your kid can learn something and learn the same skill, but with different content that you don't object to, hopefully. Okay? Now, if you still object to it after they give you a choice, then you can, then again, honestly, even in high school, in most of these situations, they will let you opt the kid out because that's usually what works simplest. But if you can't come to an agreement between you and the school, but it's like, well, the kid still needs this credit, then you can say as a parent, okay, I'm going to find another way for them to do this learning. And you can find something online, you can find different things. Okay, I hope if I have the time one day, I would like to develop like some online programming and put it on my online school. So that way, these different types of curriculum and stuff, you can have like a Muslim or religious friendly way of doing it. We could do that type of thing, And there's all different types of resources these days and different ways you can do it. But usually it's simplest for the school to just let you opt out. Okay, the law doesn't say that they have to let you opt out, but it does say that the kid can't learn anything that you object to, all right? Now, all of this, it does say explicitly in the law that it has to be reasonable, okay? It has to be reasonable. So what does that mean exactly? That is subjective, and that's not fully laid out in law. But you can't be you can't overdo it. You understand what I'm saying? If you start overdoing it, you start overburdening the school, trying to control every little single thing that they teach, that's not going to fly. Because the law does, that's why it has this protection. Laws are written in very specific ways. That's why it says that it has to be reasonable so that a parent doesn't overdo it. Okay? Questions about that?
So
Yes, go ahead.
in this day we know LTV and something there, and that class was the health class, we know student to graduate high school.
Yes.
So if one family have objection, say, no, I don't want this class,
Yeah.
children, but the rest of the community
Yes.
have objection.
Right. Well, no, this is an individual parent's right. Okay. So if an individual, so the question is, because some people might be watching later in video, is, you have a health class, they're going to learn about things that one parent objects to, but the rest of the parents don't object to it. It doesn't matter what the rest of the parents say. Okay. You have a right to that objection as a parent. Now, again, you got to work with them, say what you do and don't object to. And look, most of this is best done at the beginning of the school year, something to understand too, okay? Because, it might be you got to deal this out a little bit, okay? So, if they're going to teach about the reproductive system or something like this, and they're going to use books and images that are like graphic, and you don't want your kid to do that, then they'll say, and you explain exactly what you object to, they can put something together and say, well, here's a way your kid can learn about the reproductive system, but it won't have any of those graphic images or something like that, okay? And even if it's just one kid, they still have to abide by it. Now, understand, all this stuff, it does get a little finicky, okay? If your kid is the one kid in the class who's not going to be there in that class, that's embarrassing for the kid a lot of the time, especially in middle and high school. And then the other kids will tease him and all that type of stuff. So how exactly that kid being removed is going to happen, that's something you have to work out with the school as well. And it really works best to not have the kid there that day when they're going to be learning what you don't want them to learn about. That really is what works best usually as far as the kid is concerned. And again, you do have the right to have your kid removed from school for 3 hours a week for religious education if you want, to take them to a place for religious education. That's actually, that's the next right I was going to talk about. But, that's what works best, is not having the kid there is usually what works best if they're allowing you to opt out, okay? As far as whatever they're going to learn about and you want to find something that is not against your religious beliefs, again, I can work with you on helping that because that's, we are talking about stuff that people haven't done a whole lot. So we have to figure out the right way to do it, and it can be figured out, okay? I promise, all right? With the areas that people are talking about, he said health class. Okay, sex education is mandated by Minnesota state law, but each district gets to choose how they do it. But it's part of Minnesota state law. It's explicit within sex ed that they have to allow any parent to opt out of it who wants to opt out of it. And it's pretty much that way across the country. With health classes and sex education in particular, if you want to opt out, that's something schools are always ready to do pretty much. Because even before Muslims were ever even in this community or in the country in large numbers like they are now, you had Jehovah's Witnesses, you had Orthodox Jews, you had conservative Catholics also objecting to this stuff. Okay, sex education came into American education system in the early 1960s, and there has been a culture battle over it since then. So families objecting to that and not wanting their kid to be in those classes for health class and for sex ed, that is something that is regular for schools that they're used to. And it's explicit within Minnesota state law that you can be opt out of that. Now, the issue that has come about nowadays is language arts class. Because language arts class is a core class in high school. You have to do 4 years of it, which means you have to do full 4 years of English class. That's why your kid takes English 9, 10, 11, 12 every year in high school. It's the class you need the credits for the most. So, what has happened now through the advocacy of the LGBT community and the money behind them is there's all these texts and stuff that teach about, they might call it family diversity or just diversity in general and that type of stuff. And that's where in elementary school and stuff now you have these books that feature LGBT families and all that type of stuff. And that is what parents are concerned about for the most. So with language arts class, it's the ability to opt out is not as explicit. But in Minnesota, you have this other law that says anything in their learning that you object to, you can have alternative instruction for. Okay, and we've had success already with many families, including in this district right here in 622 for those of you who are in here. Okay, I had a whole thing, it was mostly families who usually go to Masjid as-Sunnah in St. Paul, but we had a whole thing with an elementary school here And man, they were doing a lot of it. That was a whole problem. Like they were doing a lot of it at that school, and the parents didn't know about it for years, actually. But once we found out, they showed us the books we were using, and, we had some tussles with the superintendent and this type of thing. But the parents, they got the opt-out. They got their kids out of it. A lot of them were so shocked by the situation that they ended up going back to Africa, and that's a lot of families are doing that, but we did get it. And the families in St. Louis Park got that as well at Osseo High School recently. Okay, they were doing this big unit on LGBT stuff, and a whole huge section of the Muslim kids were doing something else during that time because the parents got together and said they wanted to opt out. So these rights totally exist. Now, there is some political implications for this, okay, because this part of Minnesota law, like, parents have not really exercised it that much before, I would say. So schools are just getting used to now parents asking for this, and we're really the ones doing it. So it's likely the Democratic Party will make a move to try to strike that out of the education law. And the DFL, the Democratic Party representative of St. Louis Park, he actually said that they should do that. He called for the Democratic Party to do that after those parents opted out. So again, I'm not big on politics, but we do have to start paying attention to the elections and where candidates stand and all this type of stuff. Okay. Now, even if they were to strike it out of U.S. law, of Minnesota law, it's still probably the case that it is a federal law. Okay, the federal ruling that says a parent has the right to direct the general upbringing of their child, that probably gives parents the rights even under federal law, but you would need like an official Supreme Court ruling to make that for sure in states where they don't have it explicitly written. But in Minnesota, it's explicitly written, okay? Guys, another thing is mental health counseling is a bit of another area of concern, okay? And school counselors are generally very, very good people. They're generally very, very intelligent people. They are often people who really can help kids through mental health crises. They are people who can help kids get over depression. They are people who help kids problem solve. So there is a lot of good people in the world of school counseling. At the same time, the National Association of School Counselors, and just in general, that field has been really big on like the pro-LGBT type of stuff. And I would say school counselors and social workers generally are the people who are most likely to have done some sort of professional training where they were told, if a kid, is confused about their gender or something like this, you have to respect it, all that type of stuff. It's the place where that's most likely to happen, okay? So you might, it's worthwhile to communicate to the school that you want to be notified if your child receives any mental health services or receives any counseling. It is probably a good idea to say that you want your permission first before that happens. I don't know for sure. I can't say whether or not for sure you have a right to do that. I don't know for sure. But it's probably a good idea to do that. And just in general, be talking to your kids and find out if they're visiting the counselor's office in general. Okay? I'm not saying that a kid visiting a counselor's office is necessarily bad, because sometimes it can be very, very good. But that is where sometimes they can step over boundaries. Okay? Any questions about all that? Okay, yes, sir. No, go ahead.
I'm working for the public school.
Right. Yes.
For the most variety, they did nothing know how the LGBT, how what they teach the color come.
Right. Yes.
So what do you do? How do you advise for the parents?
Yeah. So the question is for people who are watching on video later. Okay, because the brother works in a public school district here, and most of the parents, they don't know about the curriculum. Whenever I tell parents about these rights that they have, they always say, in the Muslim community, they always say they had no idea about this type of thing. My question is, whose job is it to organize this for us? Okay, alhamdulillah, this masjid is, at least they are letting me be here and talk about this. So we are at least this far. Okay, I did a lot of work with Eden Prairie Public Schools this year with Masjid Arshad, if you know it, in Eden Prairie. And the sheikh there and a group of parents We met with the superintendent. We met with the principal of the high school. We talked about these things out. And this was proactive was the good thing. This was not in response. Okay, we didn't know about anything happening in the district that the parents were upset about or anything like that. We did this proactively, which is a good way to do it. And they agreed that they would have the language arts department put something together specifically for the community. And we even talked about doing it at the Masjid. Now, for that to materialize is taking time. And if schools don't have this in place, they should have it in place. They're supposed to. But if they don't, the best I can advise is to be patient with them, because you can't always turn things around like that in the school district, because things move very slowly in schools. Bismillah. Okay? It's recording. I can see the red light. Yeah, I can see the red light. Thanks for asking. Yeah, it's on the other side. I can see it. I appreciate that. Guys, you good? You good? Relaxed, okay? Everything's good? Yeah, okay. Any other questions about... Yes, sister.
Pardon my ignorance, but when you said that the educator is trying to strike down the law, so it's like they're trying to reduce the parents' right, and they're saying the education, is that what you're saying?
Okay, so specifically, the part of the education law that says parents have this right to curriculum review and they have a right to alternative instruction to anything they object to. I'm not saying the Democratic Party is trying to strike that down. I don't know that for sure. What I'm saying is after those parents in St. Louis Park exercised this right, and we got an attorney here and an attorney in Texas from a law firm that deals with this stuff to communicate with the district for them, after that happens, the House representative, I forget his name, of St. Louis Park said, he actually didn't say to strike that law down. What he said is there needs to be an exemption for that law when it is education about protective classes. Okay, now that is the whole thing, because Minnesota human rights law delineates protective classes, okay, protected classes, which if you're a racial minority, that's one. If you are a linguistic minority, that's another. Okay, and if you are sexual orientation is in there also, and they also explicitly added gender identity to that recently too. So what he's actually saying, it's more clever than just striking it down. He's saying just add an amendment to it that says except when it's education about protected classes. Okay, and what you will get back, this is what the superintendent of 622, the district we're in right here in Maplewood, told us too, was the reason that they have all this LGBT education is because of the protective class human rights stuff. Okay, that's what their justification is under it. And that's the thing to understand. There's always laws and the equity departments of districts will have policies that they say, well, this is all a part of that, but none of that overrides the Constitution. And none of that overrides rights that are enshrined for parents in state law. Were you going to say?
They're trying to create a loophole around the law so that
Yes. Yes. Yes, and again, I'm not saying, I don't know explicitly that they are trying. I suspect highly that they will try, okay? Now, even too, if you don't know this, when they added gender identity as a protective class in Minnesota human rights law, they did not add a religious exemption to it, because in Minnesota human rights law, when it delineates sexual orientation as a protected class, it gives an exception to religious organizations. Okay, so Minnesota law can't force us to hire, we can discriminate against someone's sexual orientation to hire someone at a masjid or a church or a synagogue. But when they added gender identity to it, they didn't put that clause in it. And religious organizations spoke against it to the House, including Sheikh Yusuf Abdullah of the Islamic Association of North America, which is a consortium of mosques throughout North America, actually, especially the Somali ones. Masjid as-Salaam's not a part of it, but a lot of the masajid around here are. And after that, they added the clause. And Tim Waltz signed it. And my understanding from talking to Sheikh Yusuf is the 4 members of the Minnesota Congress, the 4 Somali members, I forget their names, but they're all Democrats, they had an influence in that. So they essentially said to the Democrats behind the scene, look, we don't want you to have because the Democrats want it to look like we're all on their side. And as Muslims, we should be independent voters. Okay, we should not be on their side or the other side. We should be independent voters. I will tell you to the other side, the parents' rights advocates of the Republicans, they very much want us to be involved. And they are trying to court us, which I'll try to talk about if I get to talking about the school board elections and stuff. But, my understanding is behind the scenes, those Somali legislators essentially said to the party, look, you don't want to open up this clash between the community and us, so just put this to bed. Do you understand? So I think we actually, we have more political leverage than we realize sometimes, So if we keep advocating in a sophisticated manner with this type of stuff, we can prevent those types of laws from changing, okay?
I have one more question.
Yes, go ahead.
Since you said that we don't know how exactly a board member gets elected in the parent advisory committee or something like that, even if that is for the private school, is there a way that parents can complain it to a lawmaker or something if they don't particularly like a board member and they feel like they are like harming more?
Sure. Well, look, what I was saying, you have the school board in a district, okay? Then the school board they have to elect members to an advisory committee, and at least one of them has to be a parent. So that's not an elected position, that's a position chosen by the board members. What I'm saying, that by state law, they have to have that committee, and by state law, that committee has to involve parents. What I'm saying is, the state law does not tell the boards how they form that committee, essentially. So it's not an election necessarily, and every different board, every different district can have its own process. So with that, to get on that committee, what you should do is contact the president of the school board, and you might have to email them multiple times, but email them. And by the way, the emails of people in public education are always available in public pretty much, especially people in leadership positions. You can find the principal's email, the superintendent's email, the school board's emails. It's all there online somewhere. You can all find it, okay? But you should inquire and ask what the process is, okay? You can assume that they have a board advisory committee because by law they have to. So you can email them like you know what you're talking about, because you do, and just say, I'm interested in knowing the process for being on the school board advisory committee as a parent. And ask what the process is. And if they don't get back to you, email all the board members if you like. Email the superintendent and the superintendent's secretary. You can email as many people as you want at that district office. They have to respond to you. Does that make sense? If you don't like a board member, you have to get someone to beat them in an election. That's what you have to do. Okay? You're in Osseo, correct?
No, I am in Columbia Heights.
Oh, you're in Columbia Heights.
Okay.
Okay, since it's up, I'll talk really closely right now, okay? So actually the Republicans, okay, the parents' rights activists amongst the Republican Party here in Minnesota, if you don't know, there is a think tank in Minnesota called the Center for the American Experiment. They're based in Golden Valley. They're pretty well funded, and they do kind of all the policy writing and thinking for the Republican Party, sort of, even though they're not officially from them. They have a member who deals specifically with relations for school, and they're very, very high on parents' rights. Okay, they partner with the Minnesota Parents Alliance, which is kind of a Republican. She's not necessarily a Republican, the lady who runs it, but they partner with them. So they reached out to me this year, so I've had some communication with them. After the school board elections, they invited me to this banquet at this club that they have in Golden Valley, so I got to learn some information about the board elections in there. It's rather interesting, okay? Most of the school board elections pretty much always happen every 2 years. Most districts in the state have their elections in even years, but the bigger ones actually almost all have them in odd years. And in the odd years, okay, years where there's not a presidential election, especially, or there's not a Senate election, okay, in the odd year elections, there is 90% less people who vote in it, okay? So Osseo, St. Paul, Maplewood, the district we're in, South Washington County, Anoka, Hennepin, Centennial, and Burnsville, where we have all these Muslim families, they all have their school board elections in odd years. And there are 90% less people voting in those elections. So Anoka Hennepin is the largest school district in the state. In the most recent election, one board member won that election with only 1,770 votes. Okay? Now, if we have 300, 400 people at Juma, do you understand? And we're voting, and Maplewood here is smaller than Anoka Hennepin. That means the board members who are winning in this, they're probably getting 800, 700 votes maybe. You understand what I'm saying? So, we have enough people coming to Juma to influence those elections in these districts a lot of the time. So, we should talk to the Masjid about getting involved in this type of stuff, and all that type of thing, because we have numbers, okay? Columbia Heights is not odd years. Columbia Heights is in even years, okay? So it's more people voting there. But, Burnsville, Osseo, Maplewood, Anoka, these are huge districts where we have lots of people in them. And again, the more conservative candidates, and we should run our own candidates too, because the conservatives won't do everything that we like, but they will be right on these parent rights issues. And also too, the state will draft a general policy, and then the school board gets to kind of put in the details of how that's interpreted, all right? So sometimes, these policies pertain to diversity. How it actually manifests in the actual district might be up to the school board people and the people working in the district who get to kind of fill in the details of that. So on all these big issues that Muslim families are really concerned about, the more conservative candidates are on your side about that. And what I'm talking about, they know this. So they actually really want to earn the Muslims' favor. Okay, when I was at that banquet, most of the conservative candidates who ran in school board elections were there. They all told me that they respect Muslims, all this type of stuff, okay? They didn't have, the average type people. So, again, it's better for us to run our own candidates, but, the potential for us to influence these elections is really there. And if we can influence the elections in the odd years, that means we can influence the big districts. And if we can influence the big districts, we'll influence the entire culture of education in Minnesota. So it's really something we need to be aware about, and something that you need to talk to people about. And the Masjid especially, they need to whether it's bringing the candidates in to talk to the community or hosting seminars like this, inshallah, they need to do that. Okay. So another question, sister?
Thank you so much.
Most welcome. Okay. So I just did the last part there, so that saves us some time. How we doing? We good? Still listening? Not bored? Okay, good. Am I the only one who's like hot? Get all these bodies in a room. It's warm. Okay, guys. So when you send your kid to public school, okay, there is something called educational neglect laws, okay? By Minnesota law, you have to make sure your child gets an education by Minnesota law. You can do that through homeschooling. If you do that through homeschooling, then you have to keep records of what they're learning and stuff, and then if the state decides to audit you, you have to have those records ready, which they normally don't do, but that's how you deal with the homeschooling, okay? But if you choose to send your kid to school, to the public schools or a private school, whether or not you are neglecting the education of your child is based on the attendance that the school keeps, okay? So if you are not sending your kid to school for a certain amount of time, and it can be different from school to school, district to district, how they deal with this, you can put the school in a position where they have to essentially report you to the local sheriff or the local police department or the social welfare office to do like a check on why your kid isn't coming to school. Okay, in Minneapolis public schools, that is generally 2 weeks. If a kid does not show up to school for 2 weeks, number one, he gets dropped from the roster of the school. If the parents never inform the school of why he or she's not come to school anymore, and they don't get a records request from another school in the state somewhere that is where the kid is enrolled, because if the parents took him out, didn't tell the school, and they enrolled him somewhere else, then that school will do a records request to the old school. Okay, if a kid doesn't show up for 2 weeks in Minneapolis public schools and the school has no idea where he or she is, they might refer it to their social worker first, but if they don't find out, eventually this goes to the authorities, okay? And, also, too, with being absent, like in a lot of high schools, for example, if a kid's absent 10 days within a quarter, he or she can't get full credit for that class or something like that. And the teacher has a right to not give them credit at all, even if they did all the assignments, that type of thing, all right? Now, there is an exemption to this in Minnesota state law that families can have their child excused for 3 hours a week for religious education from the school day, and it cannot count against the kids being tardy. It can't count against them being absent or anything like this. It doesn't necessarily excuse him or her from the work that they would miss in school, but you are essentially allowed to not have your kid in school for 3 hours out of the week so that they can do religious learning somewhere, and the school cannot say anything about it, do anything about it, and they have to accommodate it essentially, and it's not something you have to worry about any of this educational neglect law coming into play or anything. Now, the law does say that it should be through like an associated church, and in law that means any religious institute. So like when you apply for it, you kind of are supposed to indicate where they're getting this religious education. So inshallah, it's going to be at a masjid or somewhere. But this is something that not every parent knows about that should be taken advantage of. And it should make it easy to get the kids out for Jummah every week too, because you can say they're going to this masjid for that religious education or whatever, and they have a right to do that anyway. And this is something, again, the Masjid, of course, are limited in what they can do. But, if the, like the Masjid could partner with the local school. We've got a middle school just down the road here, where the parents could say to them, hey, the Masjid, the mosque is going to hold a program every Monday or every Wednesday or every Friday for 3 hours, and we want the kids to go to it. They can't stop you from doing that, and they can't strike your kid against anything for doing that. He will still have to do the work that they miss in school, but they have to accommodate that. You understand what I'm saying? That is something especially to exercise as June comes up, because June, there's a certain celebration everyone likes to do during June, and more the schools are doing that. And also, too, as parents pull their kids out of these things, more and more, there are people within these school districts who are just really feel really strongly about this stuff, so they do what they can to make something with it happen. With Seattle Public Schools, okay, I go out there a lot. I had Seattle Public Schools has like a point person in the district for, LGBT students, okay? It's like a staff position at the district level. That person did my training, a very reasonable person, and I convinced that individual that the best thing for them to do when they're having these reading assignments in language arts and stuff is to make it easy for the Muslim families to opt out. Because of all these different reasons, all this type of stuff, person was very, very understanding. I got that individual to agree with me, and they did that. They made it easy for parents to opt out when they were doing this stuff in classes, okay? But then what some of the schools did is they had like a celebratory week in May or June where, it's Pride Week and that type of stuff. And then you have a situation where it's not happening as part of the curriculum, but it's part of what they are theming throughout the school. Do you understand what I'm saying? So on all the screens throughout the hallway and the posters and all that type of stuff, it's all going to be about Pride stuff, okay? And, in all honesty, we're not going to get the kids away from this stuff if they're going to the public schools. You're not going to get them away from it entirely. You just won't, with really how saturated it's got. And, after COVID, and there's been this kind of parent backlash in the country, that's caused the advocates for it to, do even more, and the teachers' unions especially. And this is why I put library books on the agenda as well. Because in the library books, okay, when a school has a library, even if it is a charter school, even if it is a charter school with 100% Somali kids that is run by a Somali guy or lady, even in that case, if they have a library, they're going to get funds from the state to run that library. And via the policy of the Department of Education, that library will have to have books that represent a diverse spectrum, and specifically that will mean that they have to have LGBT-themed books in the library. And the Department of Education will come to the school and they will audit the library, meaning they will go in unannounced and search through the library and see to it that they have these books in there. And I know this from directors of charter schools themselves. So even in those schools, now the school can choose to not have a library, and that would be the way that they get around it. But I'm saying if that's the case for the charter schools that are all Muslim kids and run by a Muslim director, now think about the districts. So a lot of times parents, they go in and they see books featured in the library and type of stuff. I don't see a way that we're getting away from that in Minnesota. I do not see how that is going to be changed or we're going to avoid it. I've known in some states where parents advocated and they were able to get those books like put behind the desk somewhere or this type of thing. And then just if a kid requests it, they can give it. I don't think that's happening here in Minnesota with the way that the Department of Education policy is structured right now, unless the Department of Education itself goes over a change, which you would have to change the governor in order to do that. So like the kids will not be getting away from it 100% because it's essentially mandated that it has to be in the library. And similar to the Guidance Counselors Association of America, the American Association of Librarians, they are also very, very big on this stuff. And even in October, they have a week that they call Banned Book Week, where these books that parents are pushing back against across the country, the librarians are actually encouraged in that week to make these books like featured and put them front and center. And sometimes your kids have classes with the librarian. If they have a media class, it's very common. It's one of the specials, actually, that is supposed to be offered from elementary on up. That class is usually with the librarian or the media center specialist, as they might say. It's quite likely they're going to be in the library, those books are going to be there, and it's quite likely that they will do some class with books that feature that type of stuff. Now, again, if they're doing a specific class, you can have the kid opted out of the specific class. But like changing the books that are in the library, they're there in all the schools, and I don't see any way getting around it personally. I can't see a way getting around it. So you have to just talk about the kids with that, okay? Yes, and I think that is most of what I had to say, okay? Other than the question of how we start forming a Muslim PTA or something like that. Yes, brother?
And that's exactly what I wanted to say.
Yes.
Muslim PTA.
Mm-hmm.
Generally, what's the influence the PTA do have in school boards or schools? Before we talk about Muslim PTA.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
What influence do they have over the schools, the PTA?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on place to place. Okay, I live in Matamidi over here. The PTA has a ton of influence there, okay? Now, it's like a wealthier district, so they have money. They will raise money, do all the things I was saying, get gifts for the teachers, okay, fund programs at the schools and all that type of stuff. I mean, that's a lot of what the PTA culture has been in America, okay? And you got to remember, America traditionally has a culture of neighborhood schools. I mean, even when I was a kid growing up in Burnsville, there was more of that like feel, it's gone away now as the population has diversified and this type of thing. But like, generally the PTA is doing like proactive good stuff to help the school and make the teacher's job easier and that type of stuff. That's what they're generally doing. On the national level, the PTA has done a lot of like advocacy, okay? If you go back to the early 20th century, like the child labor laws that we have in America and stuff, the advocacy and lobbying of the PTA at the national level was a big part of that. So, they have influence, it's just all about how much you assert, So like, in a lot of these districts, the PTA has been passed down from generations. So it's like they started doing programs in the 70s and this type of stuff that they're still doing in some of these places, And it's mostly white families who are involved in that type of stuff, So like I don't, like usually too, you're going to have usually a mom in the district who is like the PTA lady who's really charging it, and then it's her closest friends who are the next circle out of it. That can change depending on the size of the district. In bigger districts, you can have a PTA for each school or that type of thing. It's really up to what the parents assert. And it's something for us to think through. I mean, does it make sense for Muslims to just start doing Muslim parent groups with each school? Should we do something that's kind of more like state level, and then we can support, different districts, and that could spread nationally? I mean, Muslims have been forming different groups, okay? I don't know if you guys were following everything that happened out in Maryland. I was not involved in that, but I was in contact with, those parent groups, all that type of stuff. There were 2 different Muslim parent groups that formed from that are now nonprofits that still exist, So I mean, those types of things form, and it's a totally logical thing to do for us to do. You can file it as a 501(c), then people can make tax deductible donations to it. I don't know who the right person is to do that. This is something that we need to talk about and figure out. Yes.
I think it's something that will be good for the future.
Yes.
As you said, they pass the PTA from generations.
Yes.
And if we can start it now as Muslim community that's raising kids here,
Yes.
our kids will be able to do something in the future too.
I totally agree.
And I think the best person to start that group is you.
Okay. Inshallah, I'll do my best. I mean, to start a 501(c), I'll need at least 2 other people who aren't my family members, have to be committed. I will tell you, I do have the domain muslimpta.org and muslimpta.com purchased, so I do have that. So I have thought about this in that vein. But look, I'm also fairly stretched, because I'm trying to work as a teacher and train the school, all that type of stuff. So I'm fairly stretched at the same time, So and also too, my reach in the community is limited, okay? I'm not natively from the community. So sometimes the people who are better to do this are people who know how to move people in the community. And then I can maybe help that person. You understand what I'm saying? And I am working closely with IANA. Okay, if you guys know IANA, the Islamic Association North America, they they can at least get word out about things to different Masjid and this type of stuff. So I'm working with them. But look, brother, my emails, if you're on the WhatsApp group, you can find my phone number on there. Message me and we can get to work on this. Okay? Any other questions? Yes.
I'm a question that my brother asked the PTA. This was in 19-something. You said that when he mentioned for us. So since that day, the school they use this program or just we will start now?
I'm sorry, brother. Can you repeat the question?
PTA.
PTA, yes.
When he asked my brother,
Yeah.
this program was before or that new one when you starting now?
Yeah, look, the Parent Teacher Association of America first started in 1897, okay, 127 years ago, okay, as a national organization, and then it quickly spread where all these local branches popped up. So nowadays, you have a PTA in almost every school district. Some of them might be connected to the national organization, some of them might not be. But it's just kind of a structure that got going in this country in the early 20th century, essentially, and has just continued. But again, the PTA is not a part of the school districts, okay? It's a nonprofit organization, or it's just a group of parents getting together. You understand? So the letters PTA mean something. So I think if you say Muslim PTA, that will trigger in people's minds what we're getting at here. You understand? And then we can do it, we can do it our own way. And we should model it after the way they did it, because they did a lot of proactive, it was all about relationship building. And it was all about making neighborhood schools more neighborhoodly and all that type of stuff, So, we want to bring treats and all that type of stuff, People like sambusa and all that type of thing, okay? And a lot of us doing that stuff already, So you can organize it a little bit like that. Then we can organize educational seminars here. We can do listening sessions for school board members, all type of stuff. But I think in that vein, it makes sense to do it more statewide first, to try to make it more statewide, But look, talk to people about this idea, okay? Talk to people about this idea, because getting the ideas in people's minds does a lot. And from there, we have to get the Masjid on board of it too, okay? And the Masjid, they're not always comfortable with this type of stuff, okay? They don't want any controversy or this type of thing, which is understandable. So, the people who are the right people to talk to people involved in Masjid and all that type of stuff need to do that, I'd say. Any questions, any sisters? Go ahead, brother. Yes.
You said about 3 days, 3 hours.
Yes.
Use the student in a week.
Yes.
So that if it a student in high school,
Yes.
so that they can get credit when you graduate or whatever.
Yeah, I mean,
For the, whatever religion, something they need.
yeah, so like if you take your high schooler out of school 3 hours a week to get religious education, okay, over an 8-week quarter, he's gonna miss 24 hours of school. That's about 4 days of school, okay? But if you're doing it for religious education and you've told the school that, and it's at a religious institution, they can't use that hours missed to count against his absences. They can't use it to take credit away from him or anything like that. Do you get what I'm saying? So like the school might have a policy that if you miss, a lot of schools have a policy, if you miss 10 days of class, you cannot get full credit for that quarter. So if he misses 3 hours a week over 8 weeks, he's going to be missing, 6 days almost, okay? Or 4 days. But those hours can't count towards that 10 if they have that policy. Do you understand what I'm saying? Now, he still has to do the work that he missed, okay? Even if he misses school for Eid, he has to still do the work he missed and make up his own learning and all that type of stuff. That responsibility doesn't go away, but the school has to accommodate it. You understand? So they have to understand that he has an excused absence. So, they have to provide the right materials or whatever, give him time to make stuff up, that type of thing. Yeah. Yes. Any other questions? Yes, sister.
So going back to the PTA,
Yes.
PTA actually influence or advocate for charter schools to offer possible?
Did you ask, did the PTA advocate for...
Advocate or influence for these books to be outed in the library or in the library? Is that possible for the PTA? They have that power to out these books?
I missed the key verb that you're saying there. Do they have the power to...
To out those books, so those books that parents don't want, those books that influence the parents,
Does the
they have the power to out those books.
Does the PTA have the power to get out the books in the library, you're saying? I see what you're saying. Okay. In the charter school specifically. Well, no, they don't. Okay, because look, in Minnesota, if a charter school has a library, there's a certain fund that opens up to manage that library, okay? And actually, even if they don't get those funds, it's state law that the library has to have a book collection that is reflective of the diversity of Minnesota, okay? The Department of Education, their policy considers that to mean that the library has to have these books. Do you understand? So even a charter school that has all Muslim parents, all Muslim teachers, run by a Muslim, the Department of Education it's actually more likely to come to this school to audit it. They can still show up unannounced, say, we're here to audit the library, and they will look into it, and if they don't see these books, then they can say you're out of compliance with state law, so, now you got to take these remedial measures and all this type of stuff. The way the charter schools can get around that is by not having a library. So I worked at a charter school for 3 years that did not have a library, but each teacher in their classroom would have like a collection of books. So what you'd normally do for library time, that type of thing, would just be done within the individual classroom. That's the way around it for the charter schools, is to not have a library. But if they have a library, it's subject to these policies of the Department of Education and how they interpret state law. And I don't see a way around it if they have a library. Well, I mean, they could request to the school director that they don't have a library. They could do that. You know what I'm saying? Look, PTA, it's just advocacy. Advocacy is communicating with people. It's educating with people. It's building relationships with people. All the different ways that you do that. Just think about how you build a relationship with anybody, okay? You know, the Prophet ﷺ, before he did his dawah, everyone trusted him and all that type of stuff. You know, that's the basic pattern. You give people something of value, you get them to trust you, you know, and then they're willing to listen. That's the basic pattern. You know, if we form PTAs and then we go hard in about everything we're aggrieved about, you know, that's going to rub people the wrong way, you know. So it's you got to be methodical like that. Any other questions?
Yeah, Jeff, how can we request the curriculum from the school? Is it through the principal? Or?
Yeah, it's best done through the principal. Okay, direct, you know, just requesting it. Look, when you request something, if you say it verbally, that has legal weight, okay? It's best to do it in writing. So it's best to send an email. That is what's best. And explicitly request a response in the email so you know that they got it. And if they don't respond after 2 days, send it again. And if they don't respond after 2 days, call them or go to the school. Do you understand? Say I emailed you or whatever. But explicitly request a response. You know, write it out nice. We can work on some templates and this type of thing. You know, but look, the other thing what district do you have kids? What district are they in?
Washington.
Washington County? Washington, Woodbury, yeah. Yeah, you know, we can meet, like we can do what we did in Eden Prairie too. Because in Eden Prairie, I got together with parents and the imam of the masjid out there, and we met with the superintendent and the principal. And, you know, what I explained to them is, you know, you guys are not used to this right being exercised. Even the superintendent was not fully educated on what it actually meant. And, you know, what I explained to them, okay, Muslims, like, we are a collective community, okay? So, you know, because what he said was, well, parents can just ask each teacher individually. They can just do that. And I told, you know, so I explained to him, parents are not really comfortable doing that. So if that's what you're going to say, then what the parents are going to ask the masjid is that we go collectively, you know, like we write up some form, have each parent just sign it, and then on one day you're going to have 50 to 100 to 200 parents in the district giving these forms to teachers. And then teachers are going to throw their arms up in the air and say, we don't know what to do. So I told them, it's better that you just prepare something that is specific for our community. We can even host it in the mosque or have a special day, just you know, prepare that, and then we get it done that way, you know. And we can target specifically what the community is concerned about, because we don't need to hide about, you know, we're all adults, we don't need to hide about what we're concerned about. So that's another way we can do it. You understand what I'm saying? Now, we kind of tried to do that in 622, but the difference between Eden Prairie and 622, Maplewood here, in Maplewood, it was in reaction to what the parents figured out was going on in a certain school. So they were all defensive. And when once they're defensive, it's like, I'm actually not doing those situations anymore. So when someone comes to me now and they know something's going on, I'm just referring them to the legal people if the school's not letting them opt out or giving them a hard time about that. That's what I'm doing now, because it's not worth it for that type of headache. If it's a productive conversation, then I'm willing to do it, and you know, then I can parlay that into, you know, I can like make it. They can start doing my training, and I can try and do that. You know, it's a conversation I'm still having with Eden Prairie right now. But you get what I'm saying? So if it's something that's if it's in reaction, and I'll just tell you too, any place where they're doing this stuff in elementary school, okay, they have the family diet. You wouldn't believe how many books they were doing. You know, they had I'm not going to get into it, but you wouldn't believe how many books they were doing just throughout the year at this elementary school in 622 here. And it was the same in St. Louis Park. When a district's at the level where they're doing that in elementary school, there's someone in the district who feels like really passionately about it. Do you get what I'm saying? And they've worked over time to get other people on board about it. So it's something that they're heavily invested in. So I've found in those situations, people, they're not really open to a reasonable conversation. They're like very defensive. And, you know, you just can't reason with someone who's all defensive. So in those situations, you know, I tell people, you know, just tell them that you need to opt out. And what happened in St. Louis Park was they told them that, and their response was, well, that'd be too hard for us. We can't do that. We've planned this for years, all this type of stuff. They talked to the school board. One of the school board members this is elected school board member, literally had an emotional fit towards the parents during the school board meeting. So when it's like that, I just tell them, just go to then I just connect the people with the lawyers. Because it's not worth that headache for me personally, you know. So, if you request it, but, hopefully that instance being in the news and other things, they're more aware now that parents are wanting this and it's not worth that type of headache. So, inshallah, that makes it easier for the schools. But again, we're at the end of the school year now. It's best to be proactive towards this stuff in August, So we'll have another session next month and, we can lead up to that and try to organize this, okay, and get some email rounds going, all that type of stuff, okay? What's that? Time for Isha? Yeah, it's okay. This book is on Amazon. Engaging Muslim Students in Public Schools. Go to abrahameducation.com too. That's my website. Look up Abraham Education on YouTube, please. It's Abraham, not Ibrahim. It's all A's. There's no I's. It's the same name. It's the English version of Ibrahim, if you don't know. But Abraham Education on YouTube. Abraham_education on Instagram. AbrahamEducation.com is the website, and look up Engaging Muslim Students in Public Schools is the book. Guys, before we break too, please, if you would, give a donation to the Masjid, okay? The kiosk out here, or get the Minbar app, MINBR. You can donate through there, please, because they supported this. Inshallah, they will continue to support us doing more like this and other things for the parents and kids. Okay, I know a lot about kids that I want to share with people. Spend all my time around kids, teaching kids, okay, all that type of stuff. So please donate to the Masjid, because that will help support all this too. And for the Masjid, if they see a program like this helps make things easier for the Masjid, then we get some good energy going. If there's some way when you're donating, you can indicate, you can write in like why you're giving the money, that's helpful as well. But even just seeing that it came in on this date is helpful. Okay, even if it's $5, please give to the Masjid. Again, you can do it in the kiosk out here or get the Minbar app, MINBR. There's no A, just MINBR. Okay, Bismillah, just one more thing. It's an important thing that I didn't get to because I said I was going to talk about bathrooms and Title IX. Okay, now, the federal government, the way that they can dictate things for schools at the local level is by the schools taking funding from them and the federal government saying, along with that funding, you have to do X, Y, Z. Every school takes money from the federal government under what is called ESSA, the Elementary and Secondary Schools Act, which was passed under the presidency of Lyndon Johnson in 1964. There are different sections of that law which are called titles. Okay, so you might hear the term Title I, Title II, Title III, etc., which each one of those titles gives funds to schools for different purposes. Like Title I gives money to schools for teachers at schools where they have kids who are low income. Okay, Title IX was added to this law in the 1970s, and that gives funds for schools essentially to create equality between males and females, and it's what funds women's sports and this type of thing. This month, the Biden Department of Education issued guidelines ordering that schools have to interpret Title IX according to a student's gender identity. So what that means is that schools who take these funds, which is all schools, if a student in the school says they are female, they have to treat that student as a female, even if they are biologically male. And that includes whether or not they can use what bathroom they use. So this is actually like the biggest issue, because there is 4 states that have rejected this edict, but it's like Texas, Oklahoma, Mississippi, and Arkansas, I think. But this is actually like the biggest thing, because this essentially ties schools' hands from being able to say that biological males can't go in the girls' bathroom and vice versa. So with that, there's not like a guarantee that kids have that protection. Now, something that the Minnesota State has been doing for a while, every year they have $1 million available in grants for schools to reform bathrooms, and just to create gender-neutral bathrooms, but specifically to create single-use gender-neutral bathrooms. So what a lot of the schools are doing now is making sure they have bathrooms, at least one or a few bathrooms, that are single-use, where only one person is in at a time. But essentially, they can't dictate whether or not it's only used by boys or girls. So a girl can't be forced to not follow a boy and that type of thing. Okay? So it's actually a really big thing You know, like, and again, it's not something that there's much that can be done about it. If we were elected a Republican governor, which I don't think will happen, who appointed a Republican attorney general, the attorney general could say, no, that's, and actually this is going to be challenged on constitutional grounds. Like the southern states are going to make a constitutional challenge to that. So over the years as it plays out, this might be struck down, but there's only 4 states that have said they're not going to follow it. And Minnesota's not one of them. We could potentially pressure Keith Ellison to say something about it, but he hasn't said anything about it. So that's another big thing to know about. And by the way, from what I've heard, I think Keith Ellison is going to run for governor to replace Tim Walz in 2026. So some of these things, too, the community might keep in mind to pressure him in a certain way, because he is dependent on this community to win. Okay? So I'm sorry to end it on that note, but I wanted to inform that because it's actually an important thing.